Listen to the Impact Podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Audible, Spotify, Stitcher, and of course, at impactpodcast.com. This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. This episode of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Closed Loop Partners. Closed Loop Partners is a leading circular economy investor in the United States with an extensive network of Fortune 500 corporate investors, family offices, institutional investors, industry experts, and impact partners. Closed Loop's platform spans the arc of capital from venture capital to private equity, bridging gaps and fostering synergies to scale the circular economy. To find Closed Loop Partners, please go to www.closedlooppartners.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. I'm John Shigarian, and I'm so honored to have with us today Debbie Lizt. She's the head of global sustainability for Intuit. Welcome to the Impact Podcast, Debbie.
Thank you, John, so much for having me. It's great to be here with you today.
You know, Debbie, we're going to talk a lot about the sustainability journey at Intuit. But before we go into that, I want to hear a little bit about your journey, where you grew up, how you even got to this great position that you're in at Intuit, and how you made that whole journey along the way.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that. So I'm from the Midwest originally, and actually I am the granddaughter of a farmer. So I would spend summers in Wisconsin on my grandparents' farm. And I think that was really, for me, the very beginning of my sustainability journey. I mean, just seeing, just the human impact on nature and the land and vice versa. I've always felt a strong connection to our natural environment. And that really continued, I would say, throughout my educational pathway. So in college, I was a civil engineering major. I focused on building structures, the built environment. I was always fascinated with that. And I was privileged enough to have an adjunct professor when I was an undergrad who was an architect by day, professor by night. I don't know when he found time to sleep, but he was really phenomenal in terms of introducing me to this very nascent world of green building and green architecture. And I learned so much from him that upon matriculation, I wanted to do something in that space, and I wanted to be a part of the built environment in a positive way. And so after graduating, I went into the construction industry, focused on green building. And this was a time when LEED, so that entire green building concept, was still very nascent. It was new. And I was on a project where this large convention center in Chicago, for those who are familiar with the Chicago Convention Center, McCormick Place, they were expanding it, and it was going to be LEED certified, which at the time was going to be, I think, the largest building in the country by square footage to be LEED certified. I raised my hand to essentially guide that process. So I became a LEED AP. I guided that process, and I became, for the company I was working for at the time, I guess their first internal green building expert. And so there I would go into these client meetings and introduce this concept of green building, the costs, the benefits. And I was always fascinated by the folks who I was sitting across from, the decision makers, in terms of what went into their decision-making process to invest in these types of buildings. From more of a vanilla strategic perspective. And I realized that I didn't know how to necessarily speak that language. I didn't know necessarily how to speak the business language. And I at the time didn't have a really strong environmental science grounding. So after a few years of working, I actually went back to school to fill those gaps. And I ended up getting an MBA and then a master's in environmental management from Duke University, who at the time was one of the few schools who created programs like that. And now I'm just so incredibly impressed by it seems like every academic institution has some type of sustainability degree, certification pathway. And so for me, that's just been extraordinary to see, and just really inspiring. And after grad school, I worked in corporate sustainability for Abercrombie & Fitch, leading their first person focused on sustainability, leading their sustainability initiatives. I then became fascinated in renewable energy. So I went to work for a solar developer for a few years, but I always really loved the challenges presented in more of the corporate sustainability space. All of the problems that a large company was solving in terms of how to reduce its environmental footprint, to have more of a positive impact on the planet. And so that's really what led me to this role here at Intuit as its head of global sustainability. And, I feel incredibly privileged to be in this role and to be really guiding and setting the direction for a company of Intuit's size, reputation, and with really all the work that we do, which I'm sure we'll touch on.
But your journey's fascinating because truly, Debbie, you're what I call, with all affection and kindness, you're one of the real sustainability OGs because you were back in the original, like you said, the nascent stage of green building, LEED certified, platinum certified, that whole beginnings back when you were working on the McCormick Place project, and then went on to go get other, formal educations in environmental sciences and stuff. And I mean, people think this concept in America on a corporate basis has been around a long time. But the truth is, when I even started this show, there were very, very few chief sustainability officers or head of global sustainability or impact officers, and very few universities had any programs in this, that even it is as recent as 2007. So you have been doing this a long time. So it's no wonder, and it's a lucky break for them to have you at Intuit running their global sustainability program. It makes total sense now. Makes total sense.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's been an amazing personal journey and professional journey for myself. And to your point, I mean, I've been in this space for over 15 years now, and it's just amazing to see the change that has happened. And really just, the groundswell of people that have joined our ranks, and are really having and affecting change.
Well, you were there for the evolution, and I feel like this evolution is now becoming somewhat of a revolution in a good way, a positive revolution. We'll get into that later. Let's go back and talk about Intuit for a second. And for our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with Intuit, first of all, to find Debbie and all her great colleagues and all the important work they're doing in corporate responsibility and sustainability, you can go to www.intuit.com. But understand that Intuit, under Debbie and her colleagues, have all these amazing brands that are so familiar to us, household brands like TurboTax, Credit Karma, Mint, QuickBooks, and MailChimp. So you are really sitting on top of a brand empire that most of Americans and people around the world are very, very familiar with and have been using for many, many years.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a company, we're privileged to serve over 100 million customers globally through those products that you just mentioned. And really in our mission to power prosperity for those that we serve, our customers, our communities. So yeah, I mean, it's the impact and the amount of individuals that we affect on a daily basis is is pretty extraordinary.
So what year specifically did you join Intuit in your role as head of global sustainability?
Yeah, so I am going to be celebrating my 1-year anniversary with Intuit in this role. And so Intuit has had a storied history of leadership in the climate space before I joined this role. So I feel like just carrying the mantle and pushing the company forward into the future. So yeah, still relatively new at Intuit, but obviously bringing all of my expertise to bear at the company.
So now you joined a year or so ago. Talk about how you assessed where Intuit was and where you wanted to take it, especially with regards to Intuit's carbon footprint as it existed and operational footprint. Because there's so many ways of doing this and doing it right, and there's so many ways to show progress. And as I was taught many years ago by then, who was the person who was the head of sustainability for Molson Coors at the time, on the show, he said to me, I was asking him about where does this end? And he goes, John, in sustainability, there's never a finish line. There's never a finish line. And it really was a very early education to how these journeys go. So now you have a great storied history behind you at Intuit, but now you are sitting in the seat yourself. How do you assess that carbon footprint and operational footprint and create a go-forward plan for Intuit?
Yeah, great question. I mean, before I arrived, Intuit had been focused on reducing its operational carbon footprint for the last decade.
Wow.
And had been making, really great strides in terms of setting sustainability targets. So when I arrived, it was at really an opportune moment where we as a company acknowledged that the science tells us we as a planet, as humanity, need to cut our emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero emissions no later than 2050. So therefore, has committed, and we've actually submitted our near and long-term science-based net zero targets to Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTI, for validation. And, fully recognizing that meeting these targets won't be easy. And in fact, we're exploring innovative technologies for our offices. We're looking at new ways to engage our suppliers in hitting those targets because we know this is going to be a journey. And so right now and I'll give you a couple of examples of what we're doing.
Sure.
Since I've really taken over this role and in setting these targets, is that particularly when it comes to our offices, we're exploring procuring 24/7 renewable energy, essentially for every electron that our office uses, matching that with a renewable energy source. And Google, other companies have really pioneered this. They have far larger energy demands than we do. So we're really looking at this from how can a company of Intuit's size really lead in this area that perhaps, we can inspire other companies to engage with. And, there are certainly challenges to procuring 24/7 renewable energy. It is not easy. And so we're really working through that, with legal, through various partners to explore how we can do that because, we really see this as one, a way that we can have incredible impact, and two, ways that we can, as I said, inspire our peers to also look at these new innovative partnerships and procurement methods to really drive down emissions quickly. And then even on the supply chain level, our company's Scope 3 emissions make up 97% of our total emissions footprint. So we know that we have to engage our supply chain in this journey. And so we're looking at really innovative ways to engage with them, and particularly being a company that serves small businesses through QuickBooks, we're paying particularly close attention to those small business suppliers in our supply chain. And in fact, what resources they would need, because unlike an Intuit, these small business suppliers may not have in-house climate experts like myself. They may lack capital to really move towards this climate transfer, to fund this climate transformation that we'll all need to essentially engage in. And so we've introduced to at least our small business suppliers and our small business customers a platform that we created in November of 2021. And you can actually find it on our website. It's the Intuit Climate Action Marketplace. And it's essentially an online destination for any small or medium-sized business to get connected to solutions that essentially will help them replace high-emission business activities with more sustainable solutions through categories like energy, travel, office supplies, food waste, often at an exclusive discount. That's why we created this marketplace to begin with, was to really enable small businesses to go this journey, and particularly if they lack some of that capital, to provide them with an incentive to take those steps. So, I'm really excited about all the work that we're doing operationally right now, and thinking about that future, that long-term future. Excited about, again, creating these kind of innovative solutions to really push the needle to hit our target.
And when I read about your targets, talk a little bit about what it means, your 50. Why is it called 50 by 30 climate goal again? Explain that to me so I understand it and our listeners and viewers can understand that.
Yeah. So actually, for a little bit of historical context, so as I said, we as a company have been on the journey of reducing our operational footprint for the last decade.
Right.
And by 2019, we had actually met our goals to procure 100% renewable energy for our operations, to reduce, at that time, our carbon footprint by 50%. We met those goals 10 and 5 years early.
Wow.
And by meeting those goals early, it gave us the bandwidth to ask ourselves, how can we do more? And knowing that climate change severely impacts the ability of our employees, our customers, and the communities that we serve to prosper, we knew that we needed to look at that point beyond our operational boundary, which is why we created this climate positive commitment, which essentially states that we're going to reduce carbon emissions outside of our operational boundary by 2 million metric tons by 2030. And that 2 million metric tons is 50 times what our 2018 carbon footprint was. So that's where, by 2030. So that's where you get this 50 by 30 strategic name. That was really our goal. And, to do that, by helping these key stakeholders that I mentioned, our employees, our customers, and the communities that we serve, to really one, reduce their own climate emissions, but two, to become more resilient in the face of the climate crisis.
So 50 by 30 is was started in 2019, you said?
Correct.
It's
2000.
About 4 years out. It's about 4 years old. So what were some of I know you just joined about a year ago, but what are some of the best lessons learned since launching 50 by 30 that you're taking forward and using that as informing you as you make further decisions in the sustainability journey for Intuit?
Yeah, so great question. So, really this climate positive commitment has allowed us to explore innovative partnerships and accelerate solutions and products that, we otherwise necessarily wouldn't have explored or tested. And so, I'll give a couple of examples. So
Sure.
One, particularly in the communities that we serve, we've been able to pilot some pretty innovative partnerships. One partnership that we have is with a company called ClearLoop.
Mm-hmm.
And their work is really focused on cleaning up the grid here in the United States and providing clean energy access through the development of solar projects in communities that are otherwise being left behind in this renewable energy transition that, we as a country are in the middle of right now, and that we as corporates have been able to take advantage of. And in partnership with this company, we've been able to go into communities where we have had presence and fund these solar projects that not only help these communities, one, gain access to clean energy that they would have never had access to before, and therefore helping to reduce emissions, but two, we're creating jobs in these communities through these projects, new jobs in these communities. And we're also, through these projects, creating a platform for students in these communities to get exposure to this clean energy future and jobs of the future in this space, and learn more about these technologies through STEM educational programs. And that really has been, I think, one of the amazing lessons for all of this in terms of these projects is we're really not just accelerating solutions and projects that would reduce carbon emissions, but we're really creating a myriad of benefits for these communities, which has been extraordinary. And, it's not to say that this is easy. I mean, one of the biggest lessons that we've learned over these past few years is particularly working with these types of projects is that they take time. And there can be a number of roadblocks in getting these types of projects and programs established. But at the end of the day, the work is really more than just about reducing emissions. It's about creating these opportunities in these communities.
Got it. How many, just so our listeners and viewers, and for those who just joined us, we've got Debbie Lizt today with us. She's the head of global sustainability for Intuit. To find Debbie and her colleagues of all the important and great work they're doing in sustainability and corporate responsibility, please go to www.intuit.com. Intuit, remember, controls and owns TurboTax, Credit Karma, Mint, QuickBooks, and MailChimp. So you're definitely going to be positively affected by Debbie and her important work at Intuit. And how many employees does Intuit have, and how dispersed is your employee base?
Yes, we have over 17,000 employees globally.
Wow.
Dispersed all over the world. And it's, and they certainly are, as I mentioned, one of our key stakeholders. So, we're really looking at ways that we can not only engage our employees in our climate positive commitment and in our efforts and what we're doing operationally, but really trying to provide them with more access to solutions themselves that they can take into their personal lives that will help them lead more sustainable lives, help them reduce their carbon emissions, and potentially even, help them save money too. A couple of benefits that we have for our employees is we have a wellness for life benefit that is a certain number of dollars that employees spend in certain categories. And we open that up so that employees can essentially offset the purchase of solar panels for their homes with this type of benefit, which I think a number of our employees, I don't have the exact stats on this one, but I think a number of employees have taken advantage of that wellness for life benefit to engage and to procure sustainable solutions for their homes.
Well, what's fascinating to me is that you get to have the benefit also of having employees that are so dispersed and creating solutions and opportunities for them where they are sitting geographically and culturally speaking, but also I guess I would bet that they also get to share back what's going on, because as we know, we're somewhat, as a country, somewhat behind some of the countries in Europe, for instance, that were into sustainability probably 40, 50 years ago, but based on their size, they knew they couldn't live in a linear economy. They had to be more circular based, even though that wasn't terms that were being used regularly back then. But it must be a fascinating experience to have a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue with all these employees around the world and sharing best practices.
It is. I mean, we have sustainability champion teams. That's what we call essentially our green teams across the world, and it's amazing. I'm always inspired by the ideas and the programs that these teams are creating locally. Because to your point, so much of what's happening in the world is hyper local as well.
Right.
And a solution that might work here in the United States may not work in India, may not work in the UK, or, maybe there is some type of solution or product, et cetera, that can work globally. And so it's really neat to work with teams across the world to see what's happening both in their geographic locations and also just what we can do to accelerate what they're doing in those locations.
You mentioned earlier with regards to your operational footprint, the rethinking and how you're going about on the energy procurement. How hard is that to create the energy goals? How hard is it to achieve the energy goals that you set out about 10 or 15 minutes ago with regards to other sources of renewable energy that Intuit and your client base and the folks that you touch, which is massive, like you said at the top of the show, 100 million plus. So there's more opportunities. Is energy diversity and choice a difficult thing in the times that we live in?
I think it certainly can be. I mean, there are certainly challenges, like I mentioned, moving towards like a 24/7 renewable energy procurement policy for a company of our size. While we have incredible amount of influence, it still is challenging. There are still these roadblocks that I mentioned, whether they're legal, whether they're financial, whether they're even just structural challenges to procuring energy, which is why, we're exploring them. We're trying to find partners that will think creatively with us on how to remove some of those barriers that will allow us to connect to those energy sources. And that's something that, we're trying to do for, our employees, for our customers, for the communities that we serve. Like I mentioned with that partnership with ClearLoop, trying to unlock access to renewable energy in communities that otherwise wouldn't have had access to renewable energy before. And as I mentioned on our Climate Action Marketplace, we actually have one of our solution providers is a company called Energy Sage. And they're a solar energy marketplace here in the United States that essentially helps individuals and small businesses connect with different solar providers, because that can also be a challenge. A lot of our small business customers, a lot of our employees don't know where to begin, when taking that kind of next step, either whether it's energy procurement, whether it's even just how to divert waste, food waste, how to procure more sustainable office supplies, et cetera. And so that's where we're really trying to look at those barriers and think creatively about how we can partner or develop solutions that start reducing those barriers so people can connect to those solutions.
So understanding what it seems like you guys were so far ahead. Like you said, you beat your goals by 10 years or so, and then you made a real double down commitment to really power and facilitate sustainable practices and opportunities for your SMBs and your client base around the world, which is it's really wonderful. I mean, because like you said, so many people don't know where to even start the sustainability journey. Small and medium businesses are lost, and they don't have a Debbie List sitting in their office that they could go turn to and ask for help. So this is just unbelievably wonderful. That's great.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'll just throw out some statistics when it comes to, the small business community. 90% of our global business population is made up of small business employees. And here in the United States, there are over 30 million small businesses. And so it's extraordinary when you think about the scale. And I think particularly those small businesses haven't been engaged. When we talk about solving the climate crisis, how do we empower, a very large portion of our global business population to take those first steps to really, move along that journey like large corporations are. And, we at Intuit, as I said, we focus on small businesses. They're one of our key stakeholders.
Right.
And there was a stat that I read recently from FEMA here in the United States, Federal Emergency Management Agency, that said estimated that something like 40% of small businesses never reopen after a natural disaster. And that really struck me. Like 40% of these small businesses can't recover. And, we recognize that these small businesses in the face of this climate crisis, particularly if they lack the type of safety net that like a large corporation has and access to capital that a large corporation like Intuit has, they may never recover in the wake of a disaster. And so that's why we really are focused on trying to create tools that and products and services that can help them take that step to become more climate resilient and to be able to thrive.
On a personal note, Debbie, since you have such a great history in sustainability, going back to the McCormick Place story, when I started on the journey too back then, somewhere in that same area, there was no such thing as part of our vernacular or lexicon, such as the acronym ESG, or the shift from the linear to circular economy was certainly not happening then. It seems to be happening now. And there wasn't the financial institutions like Larry Fink over at BlackRock saying, hey, my portfolio companies have to not only be talking about ESG, but they better be doing it and proving to me that they're doing it. Otherwise, they won't be a portfolio company. Where are we in this fascinating sustainability journey? Where do you feel that we are? And are you more hopeful than ever before, given where you sit right now and where the world is evolving on these different acronyms and practices and media messagings that we're hearing more than ever before?
So I am hopeful. I really am hopeful. I know that particularly, when you read the headlines and you just look outside your window and you see what's happening, it can be incredibly depressing and disheartening. But I guess I'm forever an optimist. I look actually at particularly the work that, we've done as a company and the projects that we've been able to create and the communities where we've been able to impact. And I remain incredibly hopeful that that there is a future that is possible where, we do mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. And, when reading the headlines about ESG, I think we're moving towards a direction where there's going to be greater accountability for companies to not only set ambitious targets, but to really show progress against those targets, to really disclose the impacts that climate change is happening and the risk that climate change has on their businesses, but also the opportunities that that this opens up too. And, I think it's going to lead to, and this is me speaking personally, but I think it's going to lead to greater transformation. You mentioned things like circular economy, et cetera. And I think that there's like an extraordinary opportunity to grow new businesses in this type of environment, to think and develop new innovative technologies that, will really help us draw down emissions. And so I am incredibly hopeful. And, particularly now at a company that has a climate positive commitment that looks, not just at our operations, but outside of our operations and the positive impact that we can have for the planet, but also for those that we serve. Keeps me energized every day.
Obviously. And what's wonderful about what you're doing at Intuit is that you're empowering all of your customer base. And that's that's a domino effect that's massive in terms of not only just doing linearly what Intuit's about, but you're affecting the whole world by all your client base, which is, like you said, 100 million plus, which is just fascinating. For our listeners and viewers, Debbie's corporate responsibility report is published every year somewhere in the August area. You could find their corporate responsibility reports on Intuit.com. Debbie, where are you going next with Intuit? You're a year into this. You've got a big future in front of you and some big goals. Talk a little bit about what's next, because I find it always fascinating that there's such an interesting array of issues that you could decide to be focused on. What do you look at as what's the next thing in the years to come for you and your team at Intuit?
Well, certainly. I mean, as I stated, we've committed to these science-based net zero targets. And so, where my next few years will take me is really working cross-functionally. I mean, when we talk about business transformation, it really is about working cross-functionally across the business to ensure that we have decarbonization roadmaps in place, that we have supplier engagement pathways, bringing our suppliers along with us on this journey. It's about exploring, these innovative technologies that will really help us put us on that path to achieving those targets. And then, continuing to look beyond our operational boundary, beyond the value chain. I mean, we still, we have this climate positive commitment to reduce 2 million metric tons by 2030. That is no small feat. And 3 years in, while we've been able to help reduce 400,000 metric tons of carbon emissions, so that's a little over 10x. On our 50x journey, we still have a ways to go. So for me, it's working with my team, working with partners that we have outside of the company to continue to innovate and to continue to think creatively about what types of programs and products we can create, both in the communities that we serve, for our customers, for our employees. And so I know that it's not a specific targeted answer, but there's a lot of work still ahead to be done. And I'm just really excited about the possibility.
Well, we're very excited that you're in this very important role at Intuit. And again, for our listeners and viewers, to find Debbie and her colleagues and their corporate responsibility report, you can go to www.intuit.com. Remember, Intuit owns TurboTax, Credit Karma, Mint, QuickBooks, and MailChimp. So we're all affected, and we all get to use some of your wonderful brands on a regular basis. Debbie, thank you and all the great people at Intuit for making the important impacts that you make and making the world a better place. We look forward to having you back on and continuing your story and your journey with Intuit in the near future.
Thank you, John. It was such a pleasure to be with you today, and I look forward to our next conversations. And thank you all for listening today. Really excited to share Intuit's story with you.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking platform revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With thousands of athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent, for speeches, custom experiences, live streams, and much more. For more information on Engage or to book talent today, visit letsengage.com. This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com.